So he's drawn her wearing a very simple shift rather than any elaborate costume. What's most striking about the painting is the foreshortening. So the spectator tumbles right into the picture space. There's no foreground distancing the viewer from the scene depicted. Mary's face comes forward to meet us in this very unusual and alarming way. And it sort of abandons, really, the true rules of perspective that artists normally followed. This dramatic foreshortening. And that's way before the post-impressionist challenge to perspective and framing. In addition to that, the Archangel Gabriel is not a winged creature in the traditional manner, but a very corporeal young man who's actually naked underneath his kind of gown. The only way he's depicted as an angel is that he's flying on flames under his feet. And one hand is allaying Mary's fear, and the other is thrusting the lily stem right at her womb, and that's the moment of conception.
And of course, Rossetti didn't escape the attention of the press either.
The face of the angel is insipidity itself.
As shocking as the art itself was the audacity of these painters forming a coherent self-styled movement. The first instance of artists with a manifesto in British art was met with horror.
Their ambition is an unhealthy thirst which seeks notoriety by way of mere conceit.
Eyes which continues to rage with unabated absurdity among a class of juvenile artists who style themselves the PRP.
As Holman Hunt remarked,
the storm of abuse was now turned into a hurricane. We hold them to be utterly heretical and damnable.
As an idiot counts the strokes of a clock.
the brothers suddenly found themselves at the centre of a national debate. But at the same time, they knew that outrage often provides the pathway to fame. And with this in mind, they moved on from their initial religious subjects to explore scenes of modern life.
We often think of the French Impressionists and painters of that generation as being the ones who were the first to produce compelling scenes of modern life, life in the modern city, the modern urban world. And a very famous point of reference is Charles Baudelaire's essay, published in 1863, The Painter of Modern Life, where he describes a painter who goes into the streets of the modern city and very rapidly captures the bustle, the excitement, the flurry of modern urban life. Now, what's interesting is that the Pré-Raphaelite Brotherhood were interested in exploring modern urban life a full decade before that.
At the heart of this was their fascination with the role of women in society. This was sometimes dressed up in historical guise, as in Millais' 1851 painting Mariana, where he explores women's dependence on marriage. The scene is drawn from a poem by Tennyson.
The Tennyson poems relate back to Shakespeare's play Measure for Measure, which describes this character, Mariana, whose dowry has been lost at sea. And as a result, she's been abandoned by her fiancé, Angelo. And she's sort of stranded in this moated grange and somehow lamenting her present-day existence. It's an image, really, of lassitude, ennui, and boredom and frustration. And she's at her table working on this embroidery, and she's put a pin down, almost in a gesture of frustration. And she's presented in this extraordinary pose with her sort of, hands on her back, so she's got backache. And that relates to not only the task she's been doing, but also it's an expression of her frustration and how, the agony she feels within. She's obviously desperate for a relationship, for fulfillment through marriage, and it's being denied to her. She's been compelled towards a nun-like existence. On the other hand, she desires sexual fulfillment. And her gaze is looking rather abstractly at the figure of the angel Gabriel on the stained glass window. Gabriel should really be looking at the figure of the Virgin Mary, but he's actually looking askance at Mariana. And there are accounts of women in particular crowding round this picture and really sort of empathising with the figure of Mariana and her plight. There were more women than there were men at this particular time. So he, in a sense, is addressing a particular social issue through the subject from the past.
But Holman Hunt, bolder than Millais, felt no need to dress his subject up in medieval costume. He painted in the here and now, when in 1853 he looked at the role of the kept woman in The Awakening Conscience.
Prostitution was a big issue for debate at this time in Victorian London, especially amongst the middle classes who were concerned about its visibility in the city. And prostitutes also appeared as marginal figures in novels and in illustrations. But what is very different about The Awakening Conscience is that Hunt brings the prostitute centre stage. It's not a caricature of the prostitute, it's actually a portrait which looks into the psychology of her situation. So what we see is the young girl at the centre of the painting, together with her protector.
Hunt characteristically set up a very complex composition here, so that we actually see the window to the garden as it's reflected in a mirror on the back wall. So in a sense, he's giving us the whole view of the room, from the back wall with the mirror on it through to the view to the garden. Hunt is looking with fierce intensity at every detail of the modern scene. He's recording it all. It's like a historic documentation of a particular moment in time, and he's, in a sense, freezing that all in the picture for us.
It's a relationship which is based on beautiful things, on the apparent protectiveness of the man. But we see at the bottom of the painting a glove, a discarded glove, which I think is meant to imply that she will be discarded once he's finished with her. She has just jumped out of his lap. She has just understood that the life she's living is not the one she wants. She's understood the falseness of it. And we can see that under the table there is a cat imitating the pose of the man with his paw out. And a bird is trying to escape, trying to fly out of the window. And so we're left in some uncertainty as to whether she will escape. Prostitutes were understood to have a very set future, which involved a slow degradation and very often suicide. And I think that's linked to the fact that the model was not just a paid model, but somebody whose life Hunt was very interested in.
The model was Annie Miller, a working girl who Hunt found in a pub. They started an affair, and Hunt set Annie up in a boarding house and paid for her education. He intended to marry her, although he never kept his promise. The Awakening Conscience mirrored the relationships the Pre-Raphaelites were developing with their sitters. They were becoming increasingly attracted to working-class women, as both models and mistresses. As such, a kind of Pre-Raphaelite sisterhood formed, with them appearing in many of the paintings. Elizabeth Siddal, now Rossetti's mistress, was joined by Annie Miller, and then Fanny Cornforth, who sat for Rossetti's painting Found.
She's generally identified as a prostitute, but she's probably better described as a good-time girl. She was willing to go with any man who she fancied to supper rooms and dance halls. And she was certainly unescorted when Rossetti met her in the Thameside pleasure gardens and accidentally dislodged her bonnet and loosening a whole wealth of corn-coloured hair. She was a true stunner, and at once Rossetti took Fanny to his studio, positioned her head against the wall, and drew the careful study that forms the basis for the painting.
In Found, Rossetti paints the prostitute at her most desperate state, when the end of the road is near. It shows the fate of a former country girl laid low by urban vice. It's dawn in London. A countryman has come up to town to bring his calf for market. He spots his former sweetheart, who recoils in shame.
To underline the symbolic nature of the encounter, the poor little calf, which is on the way to slaughter, is held under a net, which is symbolic of the net that sin and shame have trapped the young woman in. The chief focus of the painting is the intertwined hands, which the Dreville Carter is grasping the woman by her wrists, and she's pulling away, trying to wriggle out from his grasp.
Rossetti would continue to work on Found over many years, but eventually set it aside, unfinished. Within just a few years of the Pre-Raphaelite Brotherhood's foundation in 1848, they had achieved their aim of reforming British art. They had brought a new realism to the table. They had upturned the rules of composition. They introduced new painting techniques and new subject matters. But they were still critically damned, and they faced a bleak future. Their work didn't sell, and they were short of money. But then an unexpected saviour came along. John Ruskin, the author of Modern Painters, was a critic of almost unprecedented power in the art world, and at the vanguard of cultural thinking. He had kept quiet for 2 years, reading the abuse the Pre-Raphaelites had suffered in the press. But then he decided to put pen to paper in a letter to the Times to support the young rebels.
These Pre-Raphaelites will draw either what they see or what they suppose might have been the actual facts of the scene they desire to represent, irrespective of any conventional rules of picture-making.
When Ruskin's letter appeared in the Times, it was as if the gods had come down from their Olympian heights and bestowed benefaction on the Pre-Raphaelites. Suddenly, they could do no wrong. Everyone knew that this man was quite extraordinary. Everyone trusted his eye and his judgment because his ideas were so fresh, exciting, and they really struck a chord with the Victorian public. So a word from John Ruskin was enough to make or break an artist.
They may, as they gain experience, lay in our England the foundations of a school of art nobler than the world has seen for 300 years.
This marked a turning point in the Pre-Raphaelites' fortunes. Now, with Ruskin's backing, the abuse in the press fell away. They could continue with their revolutionary ambitions, safe in the knowledge their future careers were secure. Despite all the hardships, the Pre-Raphaelite Brotherhood had finally won the battle. British art would never be the same again.
Hear the story behind Allegri's famous Miserere here on BBC4 tomorrow night at 8:30. And coming up next tonight, the very top of the sculpted arts, we find out how to get ahead in sculpture with actor David Thewlis.